Hi, and welcome to Bible Walkthrough. I'm Adam Ayers.
This is Wes Warner.
And we're delving into Romans. This broadcast, we're talking about free will. Do human beings have free will, or are they predestined? Welcome to Bible Walkthrough. So the question comes to us from our contributor about Romans 6:16, which reads, "Do you not know that if you present yourselves to anyone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one whom you obey, either of sin, which leads to death, or of obedience, which leads to righteousness?" And our contributor says, what does this say about free will? Do human beings have free will to choose whichever path they would prefer? In response to the question, I would say that's not what Paul is talking about. Paul is talking here to believers, and he's talking about the life of righteousness and the obligations of sin. He's going to go on to say that he does things that he wishes he wouldn't do, and that he has this constant warring in his members. At this point, he says he's following up on the idea that we have been released from death, we have been released from law, we've been released under grace, not to have to be slaves of sin. Now here he says we do have choice in the matter. I think the problem with the question that we generally ask is, do human beings have free will? I don't know if we can say that Paul says that people have free will. He would say that people have will. Now that will might be colored or affected by many factors. We have some will. Do we have enough will? That's not clear. What's clear is, if we use the will we have to choose sin, we become encumbered to sin. If we have the will we have access to choose righteousness, we can move toward righteousness. Although to say that it's free, that's a little bit overstating. There tends to be this all or nothing breaker switch. Either we have complete will, completely free will, in which nothing affects us and it's only our choices, or we are robots and we have no option. It could be very much the case that we have more will about some things that is unencumbered, and yet some encumbrances, and less will about some things because we have greater encumbrances. So it's more like a sliding scale. What do you think, Wes?
I think it sounds like if you present yourselves as obedient slaves, you're slaves of the one you obey, either sin in death or obedience resulting in righteousness. I think I hear it saying that, the if statement there sounds like we have a choice to decide who we want to present ourselves to. So it sounds like to me that we have a choice to present ourselves to sin or to righteousness. And I think that is like what you're talking about. We have a measure of will there to decide what we want to do for God or against Him, I guess, is generally, or yeah,
especially as people who, Paul would say at this point in the development of his epistle, especially as people who have received grace, which he talks about in Romans 5. Now our contributor has asked, does this contradict the idea of predestination that Paul talks about in Romans 8 just shortly afterward, when it says in 8:29, "For those whom he foreknew, he predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn within a large family." This isn't talking necessarily about day-to-day choices in Romans 8:29. It's talking about the overall end goal for your life. And maybe we can deal with Romans 8:29 at another time. But again, this predestination to be conformed to the image of his Son is talking about really the goal of why God is at work in Christians' lives, to focus them on being conformed to the image of Christ, so that he might glorify them. And that's a different question of the day-to-day process of walking, submitting yourself to a sinful situation or submitting yourself to righteousness on a day-to-day basis. So that question, those two really don't relate too strongly. One is the total outcome of your life, and one is your day-to-day decisions.
Interesting. I can hear that. The way I look at it, I see it like here in Romans 8, what was it, 8:29? Okay, in Romans 8:29, when he says, he foreknew people to be predestined to the image of his son. Like, I think of that like a parent having a child and being like, okay, one day you're going to grow up and you're going to be a doctor or something. Like, you have a plan for that son. But if that child is born and then in their day-to-day actions they're like, I don't care about that. If they have the will to decide not to do that, then they could end up not becoming that plan that the parent had for them. And I see God having a plan for every single child that is born here on this earth. It says he foreknew them and he wants them to become like Jesus. And I think that's where that predestination comes in. Like, he has already decided this is what he wants for his people in advance. And then the whole idea of back in Romans 6, like, do I want to submit myself to God and to his plan for my life and any kind of choice that leads to that, or do I want to submit myself to unrighteousness and sit around and play video games all day long and not do anything God wants me to do? And you could end up missing out on God's great plan for your life and becoming who he wants you to be because you decided to do something else. I think that we have that measure of free will. I think you see it in the world all around us, people using their will to do things other than what God has intended for them to be, which is to become like the image of Jesus Christ and glorify him through that intended purpose he had before we were even born on this earth.
And I think it fits with what Paul is saying in Romans 6 fairly well. Although he qualifies it in Romans 6:19 by saying, I am speaking in human terms because of your natural limitations. So he does say, look, I'm speaking in a figure of speech here. I'm just trying to get a point across. That we have some activity to do in this development of our lives toward the image of Christ. And that his main point in verse 14 is, for sin will no longer have dominion over you since you're not under law but under grace. So what Paul is very much making the point, God has freed us from a destructive path and has an intended glorious path. Now do something about that. That you can't give the excuse, I can't, You have to say, did you try? Are you trying to make this happen? And you do have some responsibility in how your life develops on this greater pathway. So
yeah, I agree.
The two aren't in direct tension. They're addressing different scales and different focuses of activity.
Yeah, I don't see them in direct tension either. I see them, yeah, exactly. I see them working together for God's purpose.
So for you, our viewer, the question remains, what are you doing? Are you frustrating this great destiny? Or are you participating in it? Are you making choices that are congruent with this great destiny? Or are you making choices that are frustrating and obstacles to your movement along this? That's really Paul's point. Will you get on board with what God has for you? If you did that, I think Paul would be very satisfied that you heard his text the right way.
There you go.
We'd encourage you to do it. We will see you next time and next text on Bible Walkthrough. Thanks for tuning in.